Every Mother's Son, written by Val Wood, read by Anne Dover. The moral right of the author has been asserted. In the Beginning. January 1864. The very first words that Beatrice Hart had chortled were, "Daniel! Daniel! Daniel!" clapping her chubby hands in delight. Her twin brother Charles, much more sombre and not yet talking, but at 12 months old already staggering purposefully from one chair to another, dropped down on his hands and knees. He did a fast crawl towards 2-year-old Daniel, who glanced up at his mother standing by his side, and on seeing her smile, clapped his greetings back to them. "They're going to be such good friends, Harriet," Melissa Hart had remarked. "The twins love Daniel." "Their lives will be very different, Mum," Harriet replied. "I suppose so," Mrs. Hart agreed. "But I hope their friendship remains durable, and there is no reason why it should not." And although Harriet had nodded in agreement as the children sat down to play on the fine wool oriental carpet, she could think of 2 exceptions. The first being that despite Melissa Hart's liberal views, she and her husband Christopher were rich landowners, whilst she, Harriet Tuke, had worked in their laundry room, and her husband-to-be was a small farmer just starting out on his own land. "Do sit down, Harriet," Melissa had said, "and I'll ring for tea." Harriet sank down onto a brocade chair. She loved this room, which overlooked the garden. It was Melissa's own, and one she was familiar with, for several times when she'd worked in the manor laundry room, Mrs. Hart had called her in here to ask her advice. Advice from me, she'd wondered at the time. Me from back streets of Hull, who knows nothing. But she did know about life and the complications of marriage, and those were the subjects that Melissa Hart had wanted to discuss. Neither of them, in the few short years they'd known each other, had ever crossed the wide social line that divided them. But they had a friendship of a kind, for both had suffered difficulties they could discreetly share, and both knew instinctively that the other would not divulge their secrets. Alice had brought in a tray of tea, not showing by her manner that she'd ever known Harriet, and then Mary, the twins' nanny, knocked and came in. She'd given Harriet a wide smile, for she knew her well, not only from the laundry where they'd worked together, but also from the time when Harriet had lodged with her in her cottage near the Humber. She told Mrs. Hart that she'd take the children to the nursery, so that they could have their tea in peace, and picked up the twins, one in each arm. Daniel put his small hand on Mary's skirt, and went off with her without a backward glance at his mother. Harriet had shaken her head and said wryly, "That's sons for you. Love you and then leave you." She hesitated for a second as her hostess poured the tea. I came to tell you something, Mum." Melissa's eyebrows rose. Then she lifted the milk jug. "Milk?" "Please, just a drop." Melissa handed her the cup and saucer, and then poured her own. She gave a small sigh as she slid a slice of lemon into her cup. "Something momentous?" Harriet had felt a rush of happiness. "Yes, and I wanted you to be first to know, Mum. We're getting married at last, Fletcher and me. Our house is almost ready, and we're getting married in June at St. Mary's in Ellerton. I'm so pleased for you, Harriet. I have met Mr. Tuke a few times, and he seems like a good man. Not," Melissa added hastily, "that I'm saying your first husband was not, but Fletcher, is it? Seems charming." In spite of her pleasant words, Harriet could hear the strain, the tension. "He is, Ma'am. He's nice, and he's honest, and a hard worker. He'll always provide for us, for me and Daniel, and," she added hastily, "and any other children that we might have together. And trustworthy," she said in a hurry. "He'd never do or say out anything untoward that might hurt anybody else." Melissa pressed her fingers to her lips.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?